Charcha, which is about discussing the journey, the creative journey of artists, writers, performers. And we're so fortunate to have the best-selling writer of the country, one of the most prolific, Dr. Shashi Tharoor with us. And the focus of this evening, of course, is going to be talking about his creative journey in the world of literature, and about his latest book, which is The Hindu Way, the reason why he found the urge to write it in today's times. We're going to be making a start right here at this beautiful place, Max Stars, with a special Kabir bhajan, which in our view encapsulates the entire spirit of the book. We have a young and sensational singer, Shritima Jha, with us for that rendition. It's a very difficult rendition, and when you hear this, but you will feel one with what is being said in the bhajan, in the Kabir Doha. Please come.
पल भर की तलाश में खोजी हो तो तुरे तुम लिया पल भर की तलाश में कह कबीर सुन भई साधु कह कबीर सुन भई साधु एक सांसों की सांस में ना मैं कहता ना ही मैं सुनता ना मैं कहता ना ही मैं सुनता ना मैं सेवक स्वामी हो मुँह कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे मैं तो तेरे पास में मुँह कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे मैं तो तेरे पास में ना मैं देवल ना मैं मस्जिद ना मैं देवल ना मैं मस्जिद ना काबे कैलाश में मुँह कहाँ ढूंढे मुँह को ना मैं बंधा ना मैं मुक्ता ना मैं बंधा ना मैं मुक्ता ना मैं बिरत नरंगी हो ना मैं बिरत नरंगी हो कहूँ से न्यारा हुआ कहूँ से न्यारा हुआ कहूँ के संगी हो.
You know, the wonderful thing about the book, which really struck me, was that you have picked out two amazing points about the Hindu faith. One is the sense of wonderment that people have, as well as skepticism. It's a brilliant observation. And what I was really curious about to ask you is that how did you arrive at this observation? What was your journey to this observation?
Well, you know, Dheeraj, I mean, as Kabir is telling us that he isn't a Swami or a Dharmi or anything, I'm not a Sanskritist or a scholar of religion or an expert in any way. What I am is a lay Hindu, somebody who's grown up in the faith and who's been curious about it, who has spoken to people, witnessed the practice of the faith, come to my own conclusions, but also read widely the teachings of the great masters. Well, I mean, I was struck that, you know, the creation verse in the Rig Veda, the oldest Hindu text we can find, the creation verse, which comes fairly early on, the Nasadya Sukta, says, who made this world? What is all this made world of? Who created this universe? Maybe he in the heaven knows, or maybe even he does not know. So can you imagine that there is skepticism even about the omniscience of the Creator, right in the early part of an early text. The initial Hindu idea was rather similar to the Muslim idea, which is what we call the Nirguna Brahman. Brahman being the divine force that permeates the entire cosmos. The Nirguna Brahman is a Brahman without qualities, without shape, without form. Because the rishis were rational people who said, no one's ever seen this God or this omnipresent, omniscient, divine one. No one knows what he or she looks like, or even whether he or she are appropriate terms. So why don't we just leave it to the believer to imagine as they wish? That's why in Hinduism there are 333 million names for God and forms of God. If you want to imagine God as an 8-armed woman riding a tiger, that's great. Durga, fine. That's what we've been doing this week, right? Or if you want to imagine God as a pot-bellied guy with an elephant head, that's fine too. That's what we did a couple of weeks ago.
What's also interesting is that within this, like you said, 33 million gods and goddesses, but within that there's also scope for atheism and godlessness, and that I found really curious in the book because you've really enunciated it very well. How did this come about, this idea of not having a god or not following a particular deity as your Ishdev or...
One of the 6 schools of philosophy is the one of the Charvakas, and they are... there's not a hell of a lot that survived about them. Those texts that have survived are quite delicious because they are openly skeptical about God, about religion, about the Brahmins, about their claims to spiritual wisdom, about the prohibitions and restrictions that various people impose on the work of in the name of religion. And they basically argue that all there is what there is. Right? It's a classic materialist philosophy.
But I'm curious to know, like, how were they perceived in their own time? Like, how did the contemporaries see them?
The Charvakas were reasonably respected. Some people, obviously the Brahmins hated them because they, used to take pot shots at the Brahmins all the time. I suppose if you thought of religion as the equivalent of politics, they'd kind of be the Maoists.
So you'd be like a present-day Charvaka because you take pot shots at everyone.
I'm a little more mainstream than that. We Congresses are also centrist. I'm somewhere in the middle on that.
The urge to be writing this book at this given point of time to reiterate of your understanding of Hinduism and the faith and why do you think it was so important to reiterate that? Is it not there around? I mean, do people not resonate?
What's there around these days is a very distorted version of what Hinduism is all about. Today, and particularly with the triumph, at least temporary triumph of the BJP Hindutva project, the soaring metaphysical wisdom, the great respect for pluralism, the great philosophy of acceptance that Hinduism embodies, has somehow been eclipsed by a view of Hinduism through the prism of Hindutva, which reduces all these ideas and philosophies into something much more like the team identity of the British football hooligan. Right? My team is the only team, and you have to wear my football jersey and cheer for my guys, and you're cheering the other guys, we're going to come and hit you on the head.
But when you feel that this is perhaps a time of change, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the electoral numbers, the supporters, that your view perhaps is in the minority today, and this is perhaps a time for change, and we need to wake up and look at the new way.
If you are taking the political victory of the BJP as the evidence for what you're saying, do not forget that even in 2019, when their vote went up, they got 37%. So 63% of the country hasn't bought into the BJP political project. The second proposition is that if you really look at how they got that 37%, I don't think that everybody who voted for them was voting for Hindutva. Undoubtedly some were. But there were other things. In 2014, there was a strong economic message. I will develop the country, this government has failed you, etc. Corruption, all of these things. All of which were forgotten in 2019 because they actually did worse than the previous government.
Talking about your creative journey, and since it's Hunar Charcha, it's a lot about your contribution to the world of literature, and this being your latest book. How difficult has it been? Because you've had full-time careers as a full-time career diplomat and a full-time politician, which of course many understand as you require more than 24 hours in a day. At any point did you feel that your first love, which is not the first profession, would suffer? I mean, there are people who say that, oh, I'm so busy at work, I've almost left reading books. But here you are, you write. You're writing books.
My reading levels have gone down a lot.
So,
There's just not enough time for both.
How much of an effort has it been, or has it been as effortless, or has it really required a lot of work and focus in saying that this should never be?
Of course it does. Writing is a very time-consuming activity and a very lonely activity. So to be able to do that, you really have to sacrifice something. In my case, the principal thing I've sacrificed is sleep, because the demands of my working life, and particularly not just as a politician, but as a Lok Sabha politician, so the demands of the constituency are constant and unremitting, mean that most days, wherever I am, I really don't have a free moment till about 11 o'clock at night. So usually 11 to 2 is when I'm doing all of that. And then of course one is up and bright and early in the morning to get on with one's day. So it does take its toll, I have to admit. And it also means that time you might spend with friends, or might spend watching TV or a movie, or just relaxing, or in my case watching cricket, which I love to do but I don't have time to. All those things are sacrificed because you believe that what you want to say is worth saying.
This female principle that you've mentioned in the book, which is really interesting because a lot of contemporary religions at that time, when Hinduism was sort of forming itself, was steeped in patriarchy, and here we see a faith belief system which gives the female principle a lot of space, and you have the Shakti sect, and you have, in fact, you've mentioned a temple in Tiruvananthapuram, the Artukal Bhagavad temple, which gets women worshippers every year, 4.5 million in 2017.
It's even higher now, it seems.
Wow.
It broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest single gathering of women anywhere on the planet. And just as people may choose to worship Shiva or Vishnu or whatever, you can worship any one of a multiple series of female goddesses. And that idea that the female principle is a source of strength and of life is actually quite rational, because life does come from the woman's womb. And the fact that the woman is the nurturer and protector is true of all of us as children. So why should it cease to be true when we as adults are looking for reassurance to the heavens? All of these, I think, have meant that we have preserved something which many other cultures have lost. Equally significant is that there is a gap between the worship of the woman in the faith and the patriarchy of the culture, which particularly, I'm sorry to say, in the North, but not only the North this time, it's also true in parts of the South, has become very male-centered. For every example you can find of kind of misogynistic rulings and anecdotes and stories and simple statements, you can also find in other texts statements extolling women, respecting women, saying that without women, a place where women is not honored is going to be cast in sin. And you find in our ancient history, story after story, of women being extremely highly respected, including, of course, many of the original Vedic rishis for women. I mean, those of you in Delhi who've seen Gargi College and Maitreyi College, who are Gargi and Maitreyi? They are Vedic sages. They are not just distinguished women, they are on a par with the male sages.
Yajnavalkya's
contemporaries, absolutely. So that's the kind of element that we have in Hinduism.
I just want to take off from Dheeraj's previous question here, talking about the largest temple on the female goddess, and talking about how all-encompassing and respectful Hinduism is largely. Are we moving away from the essence of it? I'm very tempted to ask this because this is something that we disagreed upon largely for the longest time. Are we moving away from the essence of Hinduism when we talk about the practice in Sabrimala? Because that comes in as a dichotomy to this, that comes in as an issue of huge distress for a lot of women as well in accepting.
No, that's the irony. It doesn't actually distress any female believer, as I found out to my cost. When the decision first came and I was asked by the Kerala media, I welcomed it, saying, listen, change comes in many ways. As I've learned from my advocacy of 377, of the eradication 377, and basically sometimes politicians and legislatures are not ready to do certain, the judiciary is prepared to go farther. So we should accept it just as other judgments of the court have been accepted. But I was quite struck by how extraordinarily unpopular my position was outside communist circles. That is that pretty much everybody whom I dealt with and was meeting, and certainly everybody in my party, immediately took the stand that the sentiments of the believers must be respected. So I decided to go into silence mode for a month, and during that month I talked to as many women between 10 and 50 as I could manage, fewer around 10, more closer to 50, to find out what they felt about this judgment. And I was struck by the extraordinary unanimity of Kerala women's opposition to the Supreme Court judgment. They said, first of all, we didn't ask for it. There was no believing ones too. The petition is full of North Indian RSS members' names. There is no Kerala woman associated with that petition, number one. Number two, they say that there is a fundamental flaw in this petition. We can go to Ayyappa temples. There are hundreds of Ayyappa temples all over the south and all over Kerala. This particular temple has a legend associated with it. And that legend is about a female princess who wants to marry Ayyappa as a warrior god, and he is not interested or doesn't want to, whatever. And before he disappears into the temple shrine, he basically says to her that as long as no other marriageable woman comes to see me, I will stay faithful to you, as it were, and you'll be the woman one day that I will marry. So there is a temple to her directly across from his temple. And believers who take these kinds of things very seriously, they say, if we want to violate this, then we are not believers. Because to believe in the temple, you have to believe in the entire legend and myth surrounding it, and you have to respect his brahmacharya. The particular Nastika brahmacharya is what this particular phase is. And they say that for us, therefore, to go there would be an act of sacrilege. The only women who go there are non-believers, so why let them go? But they're defiling a sacred place for us. And when I'd heard that from enough women, I realized, frankly, that I was wrong. Surely you have to accept that in the world as a whole, there is a difference between civil laws and practices and religious ones. But if you say you're the Catholic Church, and everybody can come and worship here, but only men can be priests and bishops and cardinals, you're perfectly allowed to do so in the same Western countries. Why is that? Because the Western countries accept that religion has different rules from civil society.
I just want to talk about caste, because you mentioned caste here. You said that India had caste but not a caste system, and the caste system was like a British import. But is that really true? I mean, it doesn't seem plausible. Before the British, we had caste system, there were caste atrocities. Even Adi Shankaracharya's incident is very famous, where he asked Chandala to move out of his way.
He did. Adi Shankar followers did.
The followers asked him.
Chandala replied brilliantly.
Yes, he replied brilliantly. So it's been a reality. How can we say that it's just the British who gave us caste?
You know, the colonial mind is to classify, categorize in order to control. So you needed to understand who you were ruling, and to do that you needed to figure out who they were, what their practices were. So as many scholars have demonstrated, and if you look at my book, An Era of Darkness, I've footnoted many of the authors who've done this. They have explained that what were very loose, relaxed and fuzzy practices became consolidated and ossified under the British, because the British codified things in a way that changed in many ways the self-perceptions of people. You have many examples of this. In fact, if you'll indulge me to go beyond the Hindu faith, the Muharram processions in Lucknow, right up to the arrival of the British and their taking over of the Kingdom of Awadh, were conducted actually by the Shias, the Sunnis and the Hindus together. Wow. It was a collective effort. But the British came with their little books and said, no, according to our books,
You are
Dharma is a
separate.
purely Shia event, only the Shias will run it. And within a dozen years, of course, the criticisms that started, the sniping started, somebody threw stones, the first Shia-Sunni riot of Lucknow broke out. And before the British came, Wajid Ali Shah, who was a Muslim ruler, used to annually, personally direct a performance of the Krishna Leela, and his own begums would play the gopis,
Yeah.
dancing around Krishna. Now, people have been allowed to forget all this because now this idea that somehow we have all these discrete identities, discrete with the other spelling, the CRETE, the different, separate identities, that idea has grown roots because similarly with caste. According to many scholars, based on textual evidence, caste was not more fuzzy. Often it was linked to professional skill. That somebody could start off in humbling and actually become a warrior, and through his prowess as a warrior be treated as a Kshatriya, or somebody with good learning could become a Brahmin, etc. But even more, that ultimately the caste identity that mattered was much more the subcaste. So your profession, your specific location, what you did for a living, how you lived, those things were far more relevant than your notional allegiance to one of the four broad castes.
Do you think it is a movement from a very ambiguous thinking, ambiguous in the sense when Vedanta and Charvak existed together, to this Cartesian Descartes thinking of classifying
Keep the
everything?
mic closer to you, I'm losing some words as your answer.
Okay. So from a very multiple thinking of Charvak and Vedanta existing together in an ancient society to coming to a Cartesian point where this Descartes' point of view of one, everything, just one. Is this the movement which is happening with us right now? Current politics included.
That it is possible to develop a monopoly narrative and a monopoly idea. It's true in all faiths, by the way. Islam had multiple forms of practice, but now it's becoming increasingly difficult for liberal Muslims. I grew up in India in the 60s, where in Kerala, you could actually not see a Muslim woman veiled. Every Muslim woman looked, like anybody else in this room today. Whereas today, it's difficult to see a Muslim woman unveiled. Because in the interim, the dominant narrative projected on television, financed, well-financed out of the Gulf, preached in mosques and so on, is that to be a good Muslim, you have to do certain things, and that includes covering yourself. So these things have changed in very liberal Muslim societies in South India, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and so on. Now, they were always both conservatives and Muslims. So in Indonesia, you had the liberal Islam of Java, and you had the very strict Islam of Sumatra. But now, even the Javanese feel obliged to become more like the Sumatris, otherwise they feel somehow they're not Muslim enough. And that's happening in India as well. Now, in the Hindu case, we always had this very, like my book is a paean, if you like, to pluralist Hinduism, pluralist Indianism, multiple ways of thinking, being, worshipping, and so on. That's what I'm celebrating in this book, right? There are those who think that's a weakness. They think our diversity is a weakness, they think our political pluralism is a weakness. They want really one narrative. In fact, the famous slogan was, as you remember, Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. That was the slogan of the what today we would call the Hindutva movement. And so the whole idea is there should only be one language. Why should all these other languages flourish? There should be one language to keep us united. There should be one religion in whose name we all gather. That's the Hindutva philosophy. And it should be all about Hindustan. I mean, this is actually a very dangerously divisive ideology. Because when you keep pushing a narrative of one, where the reality is multiple, something will give. And believe me, in parts of the country, it could even be Indian unity. Because there's some who simply will never accept that kind of version of Indianness being thrust upon.
If you look at the dictionary meaning of secular, it comes across as irreligious. It's a very inert natured word. But our constitution mentions explicitly secular, whereas my limited readings, we are a multi-religious society where religion is a reasonably important part of our identity. If you look at the majority versus minority construct, there are no ethnic, racial or tribal majority versus minorities. religious majority versus minority. So, by thrusting the word secular across our polity, have we missed a trick in recognizing our multi-religiosity and hence this
Well,
reaction?
The truth is that we misuse the term to mean what we wanted it to mean. Whereas secularism in the dictionary and therefore in the political practice of Western countries is indeed about distance from religion, absence of religion, irreligiosity, all of that. Exemplified, for example, in the French concept of laïcité, their secularism, where you cannot enter a government office or study in a government school wearing any overt sign of religion. Cannot wear a cross, cannot wear a turban, cannot wear a burqa, whatever. In India, secularism has always meant the indulgence in a proliferation of religions, a multiplicity of religions, all of which the state is happy to encourage, both for the individual right to worship and the community's right to have its own personal laws and so on. So we took a word which actually means something quite else and used it to mean what we understood by the practice of secularism in India. In my own writings, I have explicitly and frequently said I prefer the term pluralism. I think that is really a more accurate description of what we are all about. We are a plural society and we encourage the proliferation of plural identities, religious, social, cultural, and so on, all within one massive Indian identity.
We have our own understanding of the word secular, and that's always been the case. Even though we say we are secular, but that for us means something else than what it would mean to a Western audience. I think that's been the case throughout.
Interesting he brings up the dictionary meaning because that's the biggest stress point when someone's speaking with you. It's a rainbow of allegations.
I never looked at
Your
dictionaries.
language is so difficult constantly. How many people have opened up the dictionary today?
Now, I've often told young people who ask about it, I never look up dictionaries. I just read so widely and indiscriminately. When you come across a word in 3 different books, in 3 different contexts, in 3 different sentences, you pretty quickly figure out not just the meaning, but the usage, the nuance, and so on, and the spelling. So you don't really need to mug it up from a dictionary, which is a very uninteresting way of coming across words.
But you've brought a lot of words to life, back to life for a lot of Indians. I mean, are we largely underread then?
As long as you're not indulging in floxylosine negatification.
Good evening, sir. My name is Inawat Khalid. So I'm a Kashmiri Muslim, and I'm sure many of my friends also feel the same way, that when the term secularism is attacked, so it creates a sense of discomfort among religious minorities in the country, and we feel that maybe the minorities are the only ones who are clinging on to the true essence of the term now. And also, I read the book An Era of Darkness, and in that you contended that because of the colonial legacy, we might have ignored our own traditions. And you also contended that maybe like Iliad and Odyssey are taught in the Western schools, we can teach Mahabharata and Ramayana to our kids here. But don't you think in the atmosphere that now we find ourselves steeped in, this might be appropriated by the right wing, saying, now see, the liberals are overcompensating, and this is what we were saying all along?
The fundamental issue still really remains, what is the nature of our society? I mean, don't forget that when partition happened in 47, when the nationalist movement divided, it didn't divide on ideological grounds as Marxist versus capitalist. It divided on one principle alone, which is whether religion shall be the determinant of nationhood. Those who said religion should determine our nationhood, that was the idea of Pakistan, they created Pakistan. And those, including Sheikh Abdullah from Kashmir, who said, no, religion cannot be the determinant of nationhood, we are a land for everybody. That was the idea of India. There is such a fundamental division between the two ideas that to smuggle in the first idea into the second and say, yes, 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 we should be a land of the Hindus, is actually, I mean, if these guys succeed in their project of turning India into a Hindu Rashtra, it will be the biggest victory of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Because he was the one who actually succeeded in persuading some people that their religion made them a different nation. Whereas the vast majority of India's leaders, of course Mahatma Gandhi himself, Nehru, Maulana Azad, Dr. Ambedkar, Sheikh Abdullah, Rajendra Prasad, you name your heroes, they all said, no, we've struggled for everyone's freedom and we will create a country for everybody. And the Constitution reflects that. And the reason why Sheikh Abdullah supported the Congress and not the Muslim League, despite heading a Muslim majority state, It was precisely that. He thought it was distasteful to reduce nationhood to one particular religion, whichever religion it might be.
At this point, it also takes me great pleasure to especially say thank you to the team of Max Stars for making this possible, Hunar Charcha with Dr. Tharoor. I would like to invite on stage Mr. Rohit Rajput, the CEO of Max Ventures, and it's been a pleasure being associated with your team for this. Please say a few words, Rohit.
Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I think in the current environment, Hinduism tends to embrace a very linear narrative. It's nice to be reminded of its vastness and skepticism. Thank you very much, sir.
Beautiful as well.